Welcome to episode 93 of the Camerosity Podcast, the world's #1 open source film and digital photography podcast. My name is Mike Ekman, and we are back at a special time, which is European time zone friendly for those of you who are unable to join us at our usual recording time. It is just after lunch here at Camerosity HQ, so that means we should see some new faces. One such new face is camera historian, author, photographer, and former editor of UK's photography magazine, Mr. John Wade. Welcome to the show, John.
Yeah, nice to be here, Mike.
For this special recording, Paul took things really literally and flew to Ireland just so he could join us from across the pond. How has your vacation been, Paul?
Well, Mike, I had Ireland. I had the first 2.5 weeks here. I had weather like the south of France. The last 2.5 weeks, I've had Irish weather. So it's been wet, windy, and cold.
In addition, we have Stephen Strangways from Canada. Hey, Stephen.
Hey, how's it going, Mike?
And Anthony Rue joining us from Florida. Hey, Anthony.
Good afternoon.
As it is 4 a.m. in Sydney, we decided to give Theo a break anyway. I can see the waiting room is filling up, so let's get on it and let everyone in. Before we get started, 2 quick notes. Although it happened this past February, most of us just heard a couple days ago that Henry Shearer, the well-known repair guy for Zeiss Icon Contacts, passed away. Apparently he had been ill for quite some time, but that's a big loss to the community as he had a tremendous level of knowledge. He did have a long waiting list to get stuff done, but everything that people had said that when he repaired stuff, he did a great job. So as we often talk about on this show, we encourage people to get your cameras fixed while you still can. There are still a great number of people out there willing and capable to repair a lot of these older cameras, but that won't last forever. So if you have the opportunity now, definitely take advantage of it. The second one is a bit of a errata from the last episode. I apologize for those of us not in Ireland, but I incorrectly stated in the last episode that the Nimslo 3D, the little 4-lens stereoscopic camera, was produced in Ireland when it was actually Scotland. So I will take my clubbings appropriately. But we have John Wade here on the show. John is someone who I've spoken to through email. He's written and contributed to at least 30 books about camera collecting, camera history. The one that I reference the most is his Wrayflex storybook, which to my knowledge is the only book ever written that goes into the history of that camera and the company that made it. And I found it incredibly fascinating. I have a couple other of John's books here too. The first one I was able to grab, we used it as a thumbnail for the show, is his book, Retro Cameras. I've spoken many times before how much I'm a big typeface kind of guy. And I love how Retro Cameras is written using the old Canon typeface that they used to put on their early SLRs and rangefinder cameras. So this is a great book. I say it's very comparable to Todd Gustafson's 500 Cameras book, and that it's full of really nice, high quality color images. This is what I would describe as sort of a coffee table book. It's great for people who are maybe new to collecting or just maybe casual collectors and just want a really nicely well-designed book that goes over a huge number of models with some great pictures, a little bit of history, a couple paragraphs about each one. It's just a great kind of book to just sort of flip through and maybe see what kind of holes you have in your collection. I want to, let John do a little bit of talking here too. John, maybe give us some kind of origin story. Tell us about your history, how you got started shooting film photography or film cameras, and what motivated you to want to start writing about them.
Well, basically, I was an amateur photographer from about the age of 14, 15, 16 years old, something like that. And during the course of being an amateur photographer, few people had given me cameras, old cameras. So my father had some friends who were photographers and had plate cameras from way back. So when I got married, and I'm going right back to 1972 now, I actually had, I think, 5 old cameras. And I wouldn't have called myself a collector. I was just an amateur photographer who happened to have 5 old cameras. And I remember we got married, we moved into our first house, and I remember saying to my wife, you know what, I think I'll put up a small shelf and display my old cameras. And to this day, I think she regrets saying, yes, darling, that sounds like a good idea.
I think that describes probably everybody here.
So that's the point where I think I became a collector. Before that, I was just someone who had a couple of old cameras. And it grew from one shelf to a room full, which I'm not sitting in at the moment, but with about 800 or 900,000 cameras in it, something like that. What motivated me, I say I was an amateur photographer then. By the time I'm talking about, I was in local journalism. I worked on local newspapers here in this country, worked my way up from being a junior reporter up to a deputy editor, and then decided I didn't want to be editor of a local newspaper, and got the chance to be a deputy editor of a magazine called Photography, no longer in existence. And 6 months to the day after I joined as deputy editor, they sacked the editor and gave me his job, which I didn't know was coming, but it did. And I spent 7 very happy years there, making a lot of contacts. And after 7 years there, I went freelance as a writer and photographer and small-time publisher. And that's where I am. So the writing came from the fact that I was a journalist, and I put the two things together. And I suppose I became a photographic historian in the story. The Wrayflex book, Mike, that you just mentioned, is actually the only one I've published myself. And the reason I published that myself is I did realise that the subject would be too specialised, shall we say, for a mainstream publisher. All the rest of the books obviously have been published by what we might call proper publishers. But I designed and published that one myself.
And you still sell it brand new, right, from your website, correct?
Yeah, I sell it on the website. I used to have it on Amazon, but it gets to the point where Amazon does you down quite a lot. And here in this country, I'm talking GB pounds here, not dollars. And for every one sold, I was getting about £3.41, and it was costing me £2 to post. So I threw it off of Amazon, and I just sent it through my website there.
In fact, this was actually the first book of yours that I ever really picked up, because I had acquired a large number of British cameras, and the Wrayflex, as should be no surprise, really drew itself to me. I love the look of it. The design is very different. And am I correct in saying it's still the only British SLR, 35 millimeter SLR ever made?
Yes, only 35 mm SLR, and they only made 3 models, a total of about 3,000, just under 3,000 cameras over those 3 models, and that was it. Having said they've only made 3 models, I've got 10 cameras, and they're all different.
Yeah, when I have researched for my site brands that are less common, there's a huge number of European companies. We did a whole episode last time on Italian cameras, and I have a book here about the Italian camera industry, and there's over 150 different models that were made, sometimes by small companies. Ducati is most well known today as a motorcycle company, yet they made cameras, and you'll hear those kinds of stories of these like one-off 2, maybe 3 models made by a company. But usually finding any kind of history about some of those smaller companies is very, very difficult. And I was elated to see the book that you had, because like I said, I liked the camera anyway, and I wanted to learn as much as I had about it. But I must say you made it a lot easier than I usually have with other brands of stuff. Because I mean, this is a softcover book. It's exactly 100 pages. That includes the index. But I mean, every single page, I'm just flipping through it right now, there's at least 2, 3, 4 pictures on every single page. The amount of history and time it must have spent for you to dig up all this information, showing the schematics of it, factory photos of the camera being built, the accessories, advertisements, people who used to work for the company.
I did have some luck along the way with that. I got interested, and the more I got interested, the more I accumulated. And I suddenly realised that I'd probably got enough for either a very large magazine article or a small book. And the Ray Company came from a county in England called Kent. And so I wrote a letter to the newspaper that covers Kent, it's called the Kent Messenger, saying that anybody who'd worked at Ray, I'd very much like to hear from them. And I got half a dozen different people, quite old by that time, obviously, who wrote to me, emailed me, sent me brochures, sent me old advertising things. But the golden thing was, I got a phone call one afternoon. I'd been out, I came home, and there was a message on my answering machine that said, "Oh, hello, Mr. Wade. I saw your letter in the Kent Messenger. I used to be a director of Ray, and I thought you might like to see the first prototype that I own." Now, I don't know how much you know about Ray, but without boring people too much, it started off with a man called Maurice Studdert, who came to Ray with the plans for an amazing camera, which would have beaten every other camera, every other 35mm SLR in the world. But they couldn't make it. It was too complicated for them. But I did hear from another source that they had made one. So when this old chap said to me that I've got the first prototype, I thought he got that. So I made arrangements to go and see him, and unfortunately he didn't have it. What he did have was just what I thought was a bog standard Wrayflex one. And he put it in my hands and he said, there you are, that's the first one. And I looked at it and said, well, his name's Arthur. I said, Arthur, this is just a Wrayflex one. He said, yeah, but do you know what the serial number we started at? And I said, well, I don't know for certain, but I think it was 1503. And he said, look on the base, and it was 1503. So I'd got in my hand the very first Wrayflex. So I said to him, that's great. I really love that, Arthur. But, you know, when you said to me you had the first prototype, I thought you had the one that Ray made but never went into production. And he said, oh, no, I haven't got that. And there was a short pause, and he said, but I got the one that came before it. And he produced another camera, which he told me was called the Owl, which was going to be England's first 35mm camera. We'd never made one before the war. And they made 6, and they sent it out with their reps to various people to say, would you like to stock this? And all the dealers said, no, it's a load of rubbish. So they only made 6, and there was these 6 prototypes, and I got one of those in my hand. I have since acquired a few, but to wrap up this story, I tried very hard to buy those 2 cameras, the first Wrayflex and the Owl. I tried very hard to buy them from him, and he wouldn't sell. And you know, as a collector, you probably know yourself that if someone says no, but you can see they mean yes if you offer me more money, that's okay. If sometimes they'll say no, and you know that's no. So I left him alone. I left him with my business card.
How long ago was that?
Oh God, when was this? This was about got to be 10 years ago now.
Okay.
He was 97 at the time. 2 years went past, and out of the blue, I got a phone call from a lady who said, "Oh, Mr. Wade, you don't know me," she said, "but his name's Arthur Penwarden." She said, "I'm Arthur Penwarden's daughter, and I'm sad to say he passed away a couple of weeks ago, just short of his 100th birthday." And she said, "We were going through his bits and pieces, and we found these 2 cameras with your business card wrapped up with them. Said, in my demise, please send these to Mr. Wade."
Oh, wow. Well, you made a good impression on him, and you outlived him.
Yes. Yeah. Well, he was 97 when I met him, but he was a wonderful man, and he had some wonderful stories.
And you still have those cameras right now, I presume, right?
Yes, they're going. Well, what I have done, of course, is I've written a little note about the first one and stuck it in the back of the camera, because to anyone who doesn't know the story, it's just a Wrayflex one. So when I go, whoever picks that camera up will look in the back, and there'll be a whole story there for them.
Well, Paul, send John some of your business cards. He can disperse them throughout his collection.
No. My wife knows all the auctioneers in this country.
Yeah. That's great. I could go on and on, but we do have some people who joined us in the waiting room. We have Andrew Madsen. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Hi, I'm happy to be here.
Where are you calling from?
I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Salt Lake City, okay. Brian MacDomhnaill is a returning caller. He said he was just going to do some listening, so I don't think he can speak. We have Leon Blankenhorn, but he's got some audio problems, so he's just going to listen and type any questions he's got. I see Guy, no last name.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, there you go. Hey,
I was muted. Sorry. Hello. My name is Guy.
Where are you calling from?
I come from Berlin, Germany, and it's my first time. Happy to be here.
Thank you for calling in. And also from Germany, we have Fernando. I think it's Fernando Villava.
Yes, Fernando.
Hey, Fernando. Welcome back.
I just bought this book. It's in green color. Why is it green instead of black?
Because that's the softback. The softback.
I have the hardcover, and it's like it's like a textured dark gray feeling to it.
I'm looking forward to read it. Yes.
Awesome. Now, Fernando, you had made a comment in the show notes that you've watched a lot of John's YouTube videos, right?
Of course. Yeah, all the time. Very nice.
So, John, you do a series of YouTube videos where you kind of just go over through your collection too. Is that like a recurring thing you do, or is it just something you do from time to time?
It's not me personally. I don't have a YouTube page myself. But in this country, we've got a magazine called Amateur Photographer, which is actually, I think I'm right in saying it's the oldest photographic magazine in the world. Started in 1884, and also the best-selling weekly. I'm giving it a good push. Anyway, Amateur Photographer, or AP, as it's universally known over here, has its own YouTube channel for all kinds of photographic things, like how to take better landscapes, how to take portraits, etc. And they have a section for classic cameras, and they kindly refer to me as their classic camera expert. And once every couple of months, the editor and I get together, select something we're going to talk about, and we just chat. And we've made 19 so far. You go to YouTube, and it's /Amateur Photographer TV, and then go to the classic section, and you'll find me there.
I've watched a lot of those videos, and John does a great job of going through sort of the development over the decades in a lot of them. So there's a clear through line through the cameras that he's showing, and how sort of one led to another, and they're really good.
So I'm getting more people here from overseas saying they've seen the videos than I get here in the UK.
I've watched several of them. You did one on the Soviet industry, and one thing that I think is really interesting is, while I absolutely appreciate some people who are brand specific, like you'll get Jim Lager as the Leica guy, Bob Rodoloni is well known for Nikon. You'll have a lot of people who specialize in one brand. You're like a jack of all trades in the sense that you just have a little bit of knowledge about almost everything. Well, I shouldn't even say a little bit. You have a good amount of knowledge about a large number of cameras. And although you can't see it now, my camera wall, I love American Arguses just as much as I love Leica M series cameras. If it's a camera and there's something special about it, that can be true about almost any camera. I find them interesting. And that's why I really like, again, we talked about Italian cameras last week. I talked about the Wrayflex. That's why I like the Ilford Witness and the Ilford Advocate, the different cameras that were made by the less common companies. Because as much as we all love a good Nikon SLR, you could throw a rock and hit a website telling you something about a Nikon camera. It's not hard to learn about those. But when you find some of these less common cameras especially from countries that weren't, Japan, they weren't Germany, and just to be able to hear the stories about the people who made them and why they were made. We talked about how after World War II, a lot of countries put really high tariffs on German exports. So even though a lot of the German manufacturers, usually by like 1950 had started, resumed production, it was very, very expensive to get a lot of those cameras in some of those other countries because of those tariffs. So a lot of the companies that started producing things did it out of necessity. In fact, almost the entire French camera industry was done out of necessity by companies who probably did other things prior to the war too. And they made models for about a decade. And then by the 60s, those tariffs had gone away. The Japanese camera industry was much more in swing, producing things for less amount of money. And you didn't need to have as many companies producing these small, low production cameras as much anymore.
That's exactly what happened in the UK. The Board of Trade in this country slapped an embargo on stopping certain luxury goods being imported into the UK straight after the war in 1945. So the British camera industry flourished for 10 years. And then in 1958-59, they dropped those restrictions. In came the Japanese, and that was the end of the British photographic industry, or the camera industry. But another interesting point you make about small companies in Europe. One of the videos I made, you might have seen, is on Durst, who made 4 cameras. And very few people realize that Durst made 4 cameras.
We talked a little bit about the Automatica in the last episode, and the 66 are the 2 that I have. I don't have the little rapid cassette, the Duca, right?
Yeah.
Then they made a box camera too, I think before the war. But yeah, that story is repeated very often in the 1950s. Does anybody have any questions for John?
Reed and Segrist, the Reed cameras. Have you done? I haven't looked at your YouTube, and I really should. I didn't really know about them until just now. Have you done anything on the Reed cameras, or is that
not in depth? It's the sort of thing I don't know a great deal about Reed. Obviously, I know that it was the British answer to the Leica. It was the Leica 3, I think. It was a copy of the Leica 3 or 3A, 3B. Something like that, and made in Leicestershire here in this country. And remarkably good cameras, very expensive, and I don't have one. I can tell you that.
I believe they were intended for the Royal Air Force, but it was similar to, in America, we had the Cardin, which is the American Leica. And I think the story is similar in that due to a lack of imports of German Leicas, some company took up the challenge of producing their own. And while they did succeed at making a very capable camera, because I have a Cardin, I don't have a Reed either, but the Cardin is a very well-built camera that works well. It has an excellent Kodak lens. I think the Reed usually came with a Taylor Hobson lens, or maybe a Cook. Yeah. So they were great cameras, but I think in both instances, they weren't really finished until the war was over. So it was like too little, too late, kind of.
They were made in such low quantities that, they just never got any traction in the industry.
Yeah, the Ensign Commando was another camera that was made with the intent to be military use. But by the time, I think prototypes existed by like 1945, but by the time they would have been able to upscale production, the war had ended. So they were left with this very sturdy, robust camera that they had done R&D on, but the military didn't need it anymore. So they quickly adapted it and made some subtle changes and made a consumer version of it and sold it to photographers looking for a 6x6 folding camera.
Well, then the Ilford camera.
Same thing. Yep. The Witness was in development for 5 years. By the time it finally came out, it was already outdated and it was ungodly expensive. Nobody wanted it. The Ilford Witness started production before the Advocate, but the Advocate was on the market before the Witness was finished.
So what was the Kodak equivalent of a British-made camera? Was there anything? Ilford made some lower cost cameras. Were they like Arguses or for home use, birthdays, parties, holidays?
Well, yeah, if we're talking the 1950s, as we were a moment ago, there was a universally known camera. My first camera called a Brownie 127, which is just a snapshot camera. But I guess really you want to go into 1963 in the introduction of the Instamatic, and that's what swept the board as far as you say, about birthdays, holidays, Christmas or whatever. They were the big snapshot camera that ruled the world.
Well, Kodak also made cameras in Great Britain.
Yes, they did.
And so I assume they were a strong market too. They were sold quite a lot of them.
Well, the Brownie 127 that I just mentioned was made just north of London in a place called Harrow. And I think there was some made in Scotland as well, I believe.
I have one at home. I can't remember the exact model, but it's called the Coffee and Cream. It's brown and tan, and it's a beautiful camera.
So Kodak had a presence in the UK all the way back to the 1890s. In fact, the London office, it was in Harrow, was the very first new factory that Kodak built outside of Rochester. And the reason they had to do that is early film did not ship well. They were intended to be used very quickly after they were produced, and the amount of time it would have taken to produce photographic materials in the United States, package them up, put them on a boat, however long it takes to get there, get them off the docks, get them into people's hands, they would have already gone bad. So in order for photography to become viable in Europe, or specifically in England, they opened a factory in the 1890s, and they started producing film there. And I would assume that at some point it became economically viable for Kodak to start producing cameras in England as well. So the fact that a Brownie was the first camera, that the 127 that you mentioned was the first camera you thought of, these, yes, they are Kodak cameras, but I think officially Kodak LTD was, if you look at period advertisements for Kodak in that era, you always see Kodak Limited, Kodak LTD. And they produced cameras, I think, like you said, until the Instamatic. So probably into the 70s, I would presume. But it was a big industry there.
Yeah.
My favorite camera, and I have no idea how common it was, but it seems to be fairly common, was the Perma Special.
Yes, I've got the Special and the Plus. These are things like gravity shutter.
Yes.
So you it one way, you get a medium shutter speed. You hold it a different way, you get a fast one. Hold it a different way again, and you get a slow speed. And they were made in Britain.
Did we perhaps also have at that time, were there cameras that were made in Britain or the UK that were an exact copy of a camera that would have been made in the US, that it was just like a licensed production that Kodak maybe built the same thing in the UK that they were building in the US?
Yeah, a lot of the brownies. I mean, you got to remember the brownie was a pretty simple camera. There's only so many different ways you could make a single speed shutter box camera. But when you look at the huge number of models that were available, a lot of the ones from England did look different than the ones that were made here. And another thing that was interesting for me is that, we all know that as of about 1933, 1934, in terms of roll film in the United States, Kodak had switched over to 620 and 616. For the most part, they ceased production of any camera that used 120 or 116 in the United States in the 30s, but they still continued to make models that supported it in England for far longer, because I don't think that those two film formats had as much of a grasp on the industry as maybe they had here. And when Instamatic came out, that was kind of all encompassing all over the world. That was the first true point and shoot system. Easy load cartridges, usually auto exposure of some really basic type, and good but not great optics that would make images that are good enough for family snapshot photos and such like that too. But if you are a completist and you really start to get into a lot of the British cameras, there is a very, very deep well of models that you can start looking for to try and complete the collection. And I have a couple. Alan Duncan is not here, but he's been on previous episodes before too. He sent me two cameras called the Kodak Color Snap, which is a rudimentary 6x6, solid bodied medium format camera, but it doesn't look anything like any of the US models too. So they're excellent additions to the collection if you just like a variety of looking cameras. So to answer your question, Stephen, I don't know that there were too many that would have been exact copies, because if you got to make it over there, you might as well put your own little flair on it, I suppose.
You made a point a moment ago about getting a camera in your hand which you've never seen before, and you think it's the only one, and what can you find about it? And that was one of the things that got me going on Wrayflex, because I have a friend who's a dealer who showed me a camera which was a prototype for the Wrayflex 2, and it was made out of a Wrayflex 1 and adding bits and pieces to it. And he assured me it was the only one in the world. And eventually I bought it from him, and I paid him a lot of money for it. And 2 years later, I found another one. So it's not always the case that you can get it. So, but the interesting thing about it is the serial numbers of them, if I can remember. The first one I bought was something like 7649, and the next one was 7471. So somewhere out there's 7470. So.
I want to switch over to Miles. 2 weeks ago, we recorded the last episode, and as we were talking about Italian cameras, Miles confessed that he had already gotten on the search for a Rectiflex. So first, I wanted to ask Miles, where has that search led to? Do you have any updates for us?
Yeah, Blue Moon Camera, my local camera store, had one in stock, and I did go to check it out, and I was a little surprised at how much I had to search in the viewfinder with glasses to see the full image. In addition to the pretty dim focusing screen, I decided not to get it.
Okay, so that was the thing that I warned you about, right? I said be prepared for a difficult to use and dim viewfinder.
Yep, but I had to see it for myself.
Well, and that's a rarity in this hobby that many people don't get the luxury of being able to do. How many times have any of us thought of a camera as being something we wanted to buy, and we lusted over it and we gassed, and maybe we bought it from overseas and you had to wait weeks and weeks for it to show up, only to find out that this thing's not as cool as I thought it was going to be. So you're pretty lucky. I wouldn't say it was a warning. It was more or less like I wanted to make sure you had the right expectations before spend. How much were they asking for that, if you don't mind me asking? Do you remember?
They were asking 800 US. And the shutter was
with the
not
lens
properly. Yeah, it came with the Ingenue triplet lens.
Okay, so 900 basically for a non-working camera, and even though maybe you might have been able to find somebody to fix it, you were talking about possibly sending it to Oleg. You would have had quite a bit of money invested in that to get it to work. The one thing I'll tell you, if you decide you want to search for a Wrayflex, John, correct me if I'm wrong, but only the Wrayflex 2 corrects the image up, down, and left and right. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right. The 1 and the 1A work on a system of mirrors. So they've got 3 mirrors in them. And by the time it gets to the viewfinder, it's like looking into a twin lens reflex. It's laterally reversed left to right. And then if you turn the camera vertically to set into sort of a portrait mode, the viewfinder image turns upside down.
It's very awkward, especially when it's eye level.
Yeah, the camera I spoke about, the prototype I spoke about, added a fourth mirror, which corrected that. But then they didn't go into production, and the Wrayflex 2 was the first one that had a pentaprism, and that was left and right, up and down.
And from at a glance, let's say you saw a Wrayflex on a shelf from a distance, the Wrayflex 2 is easily identifiable because the prism is significantly taller.
Yeah.
It sticks like the original models, the 1 and the 1A, there is still a hump, but it's fairly low profile. And what's really neat about it is because there's no pentaprism in there. It, like he said, it's all mirrors, but it's basically hollow. And when you wind the camera, the mirror kind of just goes up, like out of the way. There was a German camera, the Ukaflex is similar in that the mirror just sort of goes up, and it's very cool. But I tell you what, when you use a TLR, which is not side to side corrected, but at least it's waist level, I feel like your muscle memory allows you to better move left to go right. But when you're holding a camera to your eye, like what you feel like should be a normal SLR, when it's still not horizontally corrected, it's awkward. I can't tell you through the test roll that I shot in mine. I have a 1 and a 1A, but only the 1A works. And throughout the test roll of that 1A, it slowed me down dramatically. So Miles, if you decide to gas for a Wrayflex, make sure Blue Moon has one for you to play with too before you invest any money into buying one.
It wasn't just the mirror that went up into that hollow space. It was the whole mirror box went up into the space between. And this is the reason why the Wrayflex 2, the pentaprism, is so high, because rather than re-engineer all of that, they had to just perch it on the top of everything else.
I have the Praktica FX2 had a fixed non-removable waist level finder, but they made a pentaprism adapter for it, which is basically what you just described. It sits perched atop the waist level finder, and although it works, it's quite awkward, but awkward in an endearing way. Like, again, these are neat cameras that you don't get to see very often, and they have a look which, when displayed prominently on your shelf, will draw attention to themselves. So absolutely worthy of adding to any collection if you so choose to purchase one, but they maybe aren't the best everyday camera for casual photography. We can move on. I mean, we don't have to stay with British cameras. I mean, anything's really on the board here. I mean, I wanted John to join us and share his thoughts on anything that people wanted to talk about, but go ahead, Fernando.
I'm wondering if a UK occupied zone after the war in Germany, did they grab some of the camera factories or copy, or I don't know?
I'm getting on a bit, but I'm not old enough to remember the occupied zone. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of stories about, of course, soldiers in Britain coming home from the war and bringing Leicas with them.
That was pretty common, though, with the United States as well. I mean, you will see a lot of German stuff produced, or I should say procured by soldiers and brought home. In fact, before the war even ended, the Allies were well aware of the Leica. I mean, we used the Leicas too. So we knew they were made in Wetzlar, and Wetzlar was not a strategic point at all for neither Germany nor anybody else. So we concentrated our efforts on manufacturing hubs of Germany, Dresden, which is one of the reasons why Dresden got bombed so badly, is because in addition to making cameras, they made everything. They made aircraft stuff, they made weapons, they made trains. But Wetzlar really, just other than Lidolf, which was the Lordomat, and Leicas, it was just a little tiny farm community. And we knew that the Leicas were made there, and we wanted them. And when I say we, I mean the Allies. But before the war had even ended, the Allied forces had descended upon the Wetzlar factory, and we were told, do not damage anything. Like, we want to keep this area of the country intact. And Ernst Leitz was well known as not a Nazi sympathizer. they welcomed the American and British and French troops into that area. So there were a lot of souvenirs taken from Wetzlar and other areas of the country. I suppose probably the same thing happened in Stuttgart and other what would ultimately become West Germany prior to that. But it's most that those stories are most well known for Wetzlar, and them being Leica. So I would imagine to this very day, there's probably still quite a few British families, maybe Irish, I don't know, that whole area. Probably some cameras that have been in people's families since the war that were probably brought home from during the service or shortly thereafter.
Am I remembering correctly that during the war, going back to the Cardin that you were talking about earlier, Mike, that the U.S. tried to use the Lights New York stuff to make that?
They had actually asked if Lights New York could produce a Leica because they did make replacement parts. They made a lot of accessories. If you were in the United States and had a Leica and needed work done to your Leica camera prior to the war, the New York office did have some capabilities to repair them. But when it came time to produce an all-new Leica from scratch to the German specifications, the Ernst Lights New York office, they were not up to the challenge. I'm sure the story is more specific than that. They probably had very good reasons not to do it, but they just simply couldn't, either through lack of parts, lack of resources. Maybe they just weren't crazy enough to attempt it. Cardin ended up saying that, and that's, for those of you who are into audio, Harman Kardon, that's that same lineage. I don't know if it's the same exact company, but when you hear Cardin camera and Harman Kardon speakers or audio equipment, that's the same Cardin. But they took up the challenge and said, we're going to do this. And almost nothing of the Cardin is exactly the same as a Leica. At a glance, especially because there's two different Cardins. There's a military Cardin and there's a consumer Cardin. The consumer Cardin very much looks like a Leica 3A, I think, whereas the military one has several significant changes, which, it doesn't require much effort to tell this is something different. But internally, the Cardins were simplified. He figured out ways to produce Leica-esque parts on an assembly line, whereas genuine Leicas were very famously hand built. You could get 5 different Leicas all made on the same day, all sequential serial numbers, and disassemble them, and there could be tiny variances between them, shims that exist in one that don't exist in another, things like that. That's the nature of a hand built camera. But in terms of the Cardins, and I don't know this to be true, but I would imagine Reed and Segrist probably ran into the same challenges too. That's, like Paul mentioned, those are so low production numbers. I've never even seen one in person, so I can't speak to how accurate a Reed is compared to the genuine Leica. But the Cardins, although very, very close and very, very good cameras, were quite a bit different.
And that was true, Mike, also in Germany. The Rolleiflex cameras, I had 2 Rolly 3.5s with consecutive serial numbers that were totally different cameras. You remember they came from Kurt's collection.
Very much.
I mean, if you looked at them on a shelf, they looked exactly the same. But when you looked at them closely, they were not the same camera. I mean, the things were in different places. And what it turns out, they were actually probably not even made in the same building. They were assembled by somebody, someone made one over here and someone made one over there. When you were hand building cameras like that, there were a lot of variations that were to be expected. And honestly, it didn't make any difference. I mean, they still had the same quality. It was just a difference in the way they were put together.
And we've spoken on this show many times about the rise of the Japanese camera industry, but the question comes up often, as it did in the last episode about the Italian industry. Why did the Italians stop making cameras? Well, like we said, the tariffs were lifted on German stuff, but more significantly, the Japanese were able to make things cheaper, faster, and better. And the Japanese were very good at mass producing things and having much better consistency. And by the time the 50s ended into the 60s, that practice of hand building cameras, while the Germans still did it, it resulted in cameras that were prohibitively expensive. And if you were just a photographer that wanted to make photos and you just wanted things to work, you were probably more inclined to purchase a mass-produced Japanese camera that is predictable and easier to fix than something that was handmade and requires a specialized repair person to be able to tweak and shim and adjust et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that's why Leica was in a conjunction with Minolta, because Minolta knew how to mass produce and to not make unique cameras, but to make repeatable cameras.
You were even getting into things like some companies were having their technicians, when they were assembling the cameras, grinding gears to match them up perfectly, and you'd get a really smooth, wonderful feeling camera. But that was because the gear had been perfectly matched to another gear. And if one of those failed, you couldn't just get one off an assembly line and drop it in. It meant that a repair technician would have to specifically grind down and match another gear to that other gear. And it was such a pain for not just the initial factory assembly, but also for repairs down the road.
Although you're 100% correct, Stephen, that wasn't unique only to Germany. The early Nikon rangefinders, like an M, or even I think the early S's still had this. If you open them up, you should see the camera's serial number stamped into the inside of the door, the back. And the reason that that was done is they needed to machine the back and the grooves that it slid into on the body so that you would have a perfect fit. It took Nikon, or Nippon Kugaku, it took them a while to be able to produce the Nikon rangefinders in such a way that they didn't have to keep manually grinding and adjusting the door channels for perfect light sealing. They were able to do it eventually, but not early on. And in the United States, the very complex Kodak Ektra, which was their 35 millimeter high level rangefinder, also had backs that were machined perfectly to the bodies. And in the case of the Ektra, it wasn't just for light leakages. It was to guarantee absolute perfect focal plane distance. If you look at the inside of an Ektra and you take the back off, you'll see these 4 square pads on the body. And that's the point at which the back, because the whole back, it's a magazine back. That's the point at which the back makes contact with the body, and they would grind away metal to adjust the depth of where the film plane would be so that it was perfectly matched. And back then, if you bought Kodak Ektra and you wanted to get a replacement back, you would have to send the camera in to get the backs grinded or ground down to perfectly match the focal plane of that camera. So it was very common, like you said, with gears to make sure that they meshed accurately, to make sure that light wouldn't leak into a film back, to make sure that the focal plane was exactly correct. For those of you who think, geez, what's a fraction of a millimeter going to matter? I mean, it can. That could be the difference between being able to see the nose hairs on somebody's nose versus just seeing their nose. We talk about the Canon SLRs had the breech lock bayonet mount that a lot of people didn't like. And Canon's theory behind why they did that was when you use the earlier FL and FD mount lenses and the original R lenses, you would mount the lens to the body and then you would turn a ring to tighten it down. You didn't actually turn the lens itself like a typical bayonet, like on a Nikon F. When you mount a Nikon F mount, you're pressing the surface of the lens to the lens mount and you're twisting the lens so the metal is rubbing up against itself. Canon thought that over time, constantly mounting and dismounting lenses could file away the metal and potentially throw off the focal plane of the camera. And while that probably didn't happen all that often, that was the reason they did that. So there was value back then in making things as perfectly as possible, but the only way to do that was by manipulating the stuff manually.
I do kind of miss those days when you could purchase something and whether it was a lens or a camera on its own or pairing them up, you'd be guaranteed that everything had been checked over and made to match perfectly. And as costs had to reduce, I think a lot of people think it was going to places where labor was cheaper, but a lot of it was really just changing the philosophy of manufacturing. And it became just pre-made assemblies, slap everything together and do a quality control check. And if something is good enough, it passes. And if it's not quite good enough, it gets thrown in the bin and discarded or disassembled, and they try reassembling a bunch of different parts differently. But it meant that nothing was ever 100% perfect. It was only within the range of tolerances that the company had decided to accept.
Sure.
And then you had the Soviet industry, which was shove the cameras out the door and then take them to your local camera repairman and make them work.
There was a time when people associated lens bubbles like actual bubbles in the glass as a sign of a good lens. Like, think about it, a lens's job is to focus light. So light needs to travel through the glass to make a focused image, but having an orb, a hollow orb embedded into the glass is going to disrupt that. Yet that was considered the norm of a first half 20th century Zeiss lens, was you wanted to see those orbs in it because it was made using whatever processes produced the best lenses of the time. And then when Nippon Kogaku was producing the Nikkors, and you hear the story of David Douglas Duncan, who had quote unquote discovered Nikon and started shooting the Korean War with Nikkor glasses on his Leica camera, and then the Nikkor lenses didn't have the lens bubbles, and it, even though it doesn't make a difference, it did make enough of a difference to where really, really critical photographers would look at their images under like a loop and be like, holy crap, these are sharper than anything we've seen before. So yeah, to have a Tessar from the 30s and have a bubble in it, even though that's an optical imperfection, that was considered quality back then.
The Leica optical guys refer to those bubbles as little elephants. Because if you own one, they look as big as an elephant, but they had no bearing at all. I got a big kick out of that. I was at the Leica school in 1986. It was a dealer only school, and they were pouring glass that day for the Noctilux, and the Noctilux glass was actually poured in Wetzlar into a outdoor furnace that had a platinum crucible. And they did 1 liter of glass at a time to make those, and they would inspect them. And they didn't, if there was any bubbles in it, they didn't care. You know, they knew that somebody was going to bitch about it, but they really didn't care. They considered it to be part of the process.
And it could even be exactly where that element that has the bubbles is located in the lens, that something near the front element isn't really going to make much of a difference. But if it's right near the aperture, yeah, then you might see it.
John, I'm looking through your books, and you have one called Clockwork Cameras, which looks like it's got a whole bunch of motorized, you know, like the burning robot cameras with a motorized film transport. That is, if there was a subgenre of cameras that I'm eminently fascinated about, it's these Clockwork wind-up cameras, because, you know, any electrical motor can advance film, but when you have a gear or springs that does the of it advancing, I am enthralled with one of those cameras. So is that like a subset of cameras that has always fascinated you too?
See, the thing is with me, Mike, I go through phases. You know, I've been going through the Wrayflex phase now for about 30 years, but I did go through the Clockwork camera phase, and I just gathered everyone I could possibly get together, and then because I'm the person I am, I had to write about it. But I have just acquired, literally only about a year ago, the very first Clockwork camera, which I've been in search of for many, many years. It's called Le Pascal.
The Pascal, yep.
First camera with a Clockwork motor drive, which is 18 something. I can't remember what, 18.
You have one?
Yes, I've just acquired one for the first time. I've been looking for one for years. There is one in my book, which belongs to a friend of mine. I borrowed a photograph, and he wanted straight back. But I found it on eBay, and I was very pleased with that.
I am aware of the Pascal. I've seen pictures of it before, but I've never seen one in person. But I may, and I could be wrong because I'm not done with my research on it, but I may have the second ever wind-up motorized Clockwork camera, which was made by Ansco. It's called the number 1A automatic Ansco, and that camera dates to the 20s. And so you are familiar with this camera then?
Yeah, there's two models. There's one which winds the film immediately as you take the picture and link to the shutter release, and prior to that, one which didn't, and you just had to press a separate lever. Yep.
They called that one the semi-automatic Ansco, and they look very similar from the outside. There are several other differences. The body covering between the two is different. The semi-automatic doesn't have as good of a lens. When you look at the automatic Ansco, it's got this little lever that sticks out of this. So in other words, let me describe this to you. It looks like a fairly ordinary early 20th century folding bed camera, right? It's a bellows camera, roll film. They both used what they called number 1A size film, which in Kodak speak is 1/16. So it makes 1/16 size images. So picture a leather covered roll film folding camera. It folds out. You have to manually extend the bellows and the shutter. It has a like a leaf shutter, a rim set, dial set type. It's an American shutter, probably made by Wollensack, if I had to guess. And if you just glance at it, like if you don't know what you're looking at, you could very easily pass this camera up as not being anything special. However, the most notable thing about its design is the clockwork mechanism is on only one side of the camera. So one side of the camera, if you were looking at it straight on, it would be on the right. It's thicker than the left side is. So the camera is slightly not symmetrical. The one side is thicker than another, but it has a motor windup on it. And the bellows is completely shot on it, so it is unusable, but the motorized film transport does work. And I tell you, hearing the sound of that thing winding up and then the clockwork mechanism of it pulling along what would the equivalent be 1/16 type film to get to the next image is really, really neat. And I would love to see one of the Pascals in person to see how that one works and hear it. But I'm a huge sucker for clockwork cameras, even the simpler ones like the Kodak Motormatic or the Fujica Drive. The robots are very well known for that too. One of my almost all-time favorite cameras that I've talked about many times here is the Bell & Howell Photon, which uses a clockwork mechanism too. And what I love about the Photon is it's capable of rapid fire too. So you can wind this thing up, and then there's a little lever on it, which you could put it in either single or continuous mode. And when you put it in continuous mode, you get that luxurious mechanical ticking, clacking. Let's see if we can get it on audio here. Here we go. You can hear it slowing down. That's music to my ears.
Leon just asked about an Agfa Moto Rapid C. Do you know that one, Mike?
I do not. Moto Rapid C.
It seems to be possibly more common and maybe in Europe than in the US. John, are you familiar with that particular model?
Not at all. And to be quite honest, in merely mentioning it, you quite upset me because I thought I knew about all of them.
Well, Leon is holding a picture of one up. Looks like probably a 60s vintage.
It's spring driven. I'm taking a look at the picture. I was almost about to gotcha and say that might be electronic, but it is not electronic.
Okay, and it's an ISO rapid.
Yeah, it's a rapid film.
Yep. ISO rapid, but okay, so it's just like it would be like a Fuji spring drive. The also was rapid, so probably Fuji and that Agfa are very similar.
The Pascal is quite interesting because it works like no other, insofar as you start off by loading the film, which has no backing paper. It's just film with a leader and trailer on the end. You shut it up and you wind the film all the way to the end. And as you're doing that, you're also winding a motor. And then as you release the shutter, it winds it back one frame at a time. So
that's cool.
I guess as the motor got older and slowed down, you might end up with quite a lot of films not completely exposed.
So the film itself is what's tensioning the motor?
Yeah. Well, the film goes onto a take-up spool, and as you wind it all the way through to start with, before you make an exposure, and that also winds up the motor. And then as you press the shutter release, it winds it back one frame at a time.
Oh man,
that's how the X-Pan. I mean, it's obviously a battery motor, but the X-Pan does that. Rolls the entire film out. I'm curious. I've always thought it would be cool to have a clockwork camera, but as a collector, I only buy cameras that I'll actually enjoy shooting with, and that I can kind of keep working. And I'd be curious to know sort of what some good options for a clockwork motor-driven camera would be that I can reasonably expect to actually be able to use and maybe get fixed. It seems like the robots are the
robot. Yes, robot.
Yeah, robot would be it. I mean, Anthony and I are robot fans.
The robot too is just built like a tank. Even when they're ratty and look like they're on their last legs, they still function. I'm surprisingly robust cameras.
The robot 24 with the square format seems kind of cool because I don't actually have a square format 35mm camera.
Well, there you go. Yeah. You have a mission now.
Yeah, well, as if I need one.
this is a very contentious recommendation. I happen to like this camera, but there are many people who really do not like it. But if you're looking for an unusual looking operating clockwork camera, the Canon dial would be a good one to try too. I think they're well made.
I love shooting my dial.
Yeah, they're excellent lenses, very, very high quality. I think it's like, if I remember correctly, it's like a 6-element lens that they put on this tiny little camera. And it's one of the few cameras that's designed to be completely operated single-handedly. So, but there are some people who hate that camera too. So I say that with a caveat. I happen to really like them.
No, I agree with you, Mike. I like it too. And I will also caution you that if you buy one, 9 out of 10 people who sell those cameras sell them as is because they don't work.
Yes.
And what that means is they wound it up and pushed the button and it didn't fire. It doesn't fire unless it has film in it.
Right.
So if you put film in it, they probably work fine. So just you have to test them if you're going to buy one.
One of the more annoying aspects of the Canon is that it's another one of those cameras where to change the battery, you have to open it up as if you were exposing, like loading it up for film. So if the battery dies halfway through a roll, you have to put it in a changing bag and get the film out. So just make sure that if you've been playing roulette with the battery, change it before you load it so that you have a fresh battery.
Yeah, that's probably extra important when you're like I am, and probably like a lot of us, where it sits for quite a while before you shoot, between times shooting it.
Me personally, because that uses the 625, it uses a mercury battery. And, mercury famously is not the same voltage as alkaline batteries, but you can get alkaline equivalent 625 batteries. The biggest issue whenever you try to put an alkaline battery in a camera that was designed for a mercury battery is that mercury batteries would maintain their voltage almost all the way throughout their life, and the voltage would only drop off near the very end, whereas alkaline batteries are constantly lower and their voltage is slowly dropping throughout the course. So you could have an alkaline battery that's halfway through its life and it's going to be putting out a different voltage. But the what I do is I go to Amazon and I get the alkaline, the really cheap generic 625 equivalents, and I use them once. So if you're going to get the Canon dial, to Anthony's point, you don't want it to run out while you're shooting it. Just don't put the battery in until you're ready to use it, and just try to get through that roll in a reasonable amount of time. Don't ever let it sit. If it has sit, just discard the battery and maybe get something else.
Yeah, that's a good tip. Just treat the battery like part of the roll of film. You just need one.
Yeah, I mean, ecologically, probably not very earth friendly, us constantly throwing away these batteries, but I don't trust the cheap generic batteries. And even the LR44s, the little pen button cell batteries, they just don't seem to last like the silver oxide batteries used to. So I buy them in bulk from Amazon, and I typically use one per camera and just toss them. I recycle them. Yeah, that's what I do. But yeah, I mean, the Canon dial is great. The robots are a great option too, because there's a lot of them. They're very cool. They are square format. They can be fixed because they're entirely mechanical if you find someone who's willing to do it. I don't know that I would recommend this one to you. So this isn't a recommended for a camera to here, but this is one of my favorite. This is a Practina, a KW Practina, with not only the 250 exposure magazine back, but it has the wind-up motor drive on it. So it's got this huge knob on the bottom that you wind up. I'll do it here. And it actually has a button that covers the shutter release on the front of the camera. So basically the motor drive has its own button, and when you press it down, it presses the shutter release on the camera. And it's a mechanical cacophony of sounds. I'm sure it's not as loud as it sounds in real life, but this is definitely not a camera you'd want to take where you need to be discreet or quiet. But it's cool.
Is that a 250 exposure magazine? Is it?
I think so. I honestly have never tried it. This is a display camera. Yeah, but yes, it's, I mean, you could see how big this thing is.
Yeah, that's cool.
Another one, if you just want to play around with a camera, just to have one, the Kodak Motormatic. I think I got mine for I bought a lot of 5 cameras for $15 because it had a signet that I wanted in it. So they're practically disposable. People like literally use them as like, just stuffing into boxes to keep things from rattling around. You know, um, it's a clunky 1950s looking Kodak, but it works. And it's a cheap way to get a working wind up camera.
I agree 100%. They are attractive cameras. Plus, the Motormatic came with Eastman Kodak's best 4-element f2.8 lens at the time that they were putting on their point and shoot cameras. So it's basically like a Tessar copy lens that produces really, really razor sharp, high quality images. But I will tell you, and I assume you have the first model, Anthony, they made 3 versions of the Motormatic. There's the Motormatic 35, which is the one that you're going to want to get. But they also made a version called the Motormatic F and the Motormatic R4. And both of those, although they look very similar, they do not allow manual control over, it's either the shutter speed or the aperture. I cannot remember. I do recall when I was researching this model that only the original Motormatic 35 allows you manual control over the shutter if the selenium meter doesn't work, whereas the later 2 models have are auto exposure only. You can't manually control. So what I'm trying to say is, if the meter's dead, the selenium cell isn't working anymore, those cameras will not work. But if you can get the original Motormatic 35, that one can run with or without the meter.
Yeah, I might have to look for one of those. I would like to get a robot, but they're, moderately priced. They're not cheap.
Yeah.
I mean, you literally should be able to get the Kodak for $25.
Yeah, they're really cheap, and most of the time they're mislisted on eBay. So just if you search for Kodak Motormatic, look at the pictures, and the top plate should literally say Kodak Motormatic 35. That's it. If there's anything after the 35, you don't want those.
There is another alternative. It's the Ricoh Auto Half.
Yes, Ricoh made quite a few wind-up cameras too.
The Ricoh Auto Half. How many of those do you think Kurt had?
Oh, he had quite a few. Do you remember that book I showed you though?
Oh yeah. They made so many versions of that camera with different finishes, and they were all beautiful. I mean, they were just really, really beautiful cameras. I think I had 10 or 12 of them.
We were talking several episodes ago about the Pentax Q series. It came in like 70 different color combinations. I think there were more Ricoh cameras. The Japanese people made so many. There was no Evangelion version or anything like that, but they came with a variety of body coverings, patterns on them, and some of them even had you could get them with a f1.9 lens. They would put a very large aperture lens on what is a tiny little camera that shoots half frame images.
It was kind of fun when the Pentax 17, which is Pentax's new half-frame film camera, maybe shortly before it came out, and they were doing some marketing for it. They did a whole video with the Ricoh Auto Half, which was fun because it's Ricoh,
right? Ricoh
going back to some old camera,
and it showed a lot of the variations.
I don't remember that. I remember it was a Japanese influencer.
Okay,
I've never heard of her, but she was talking about how she shoots the Auto Half, and it was a video with her out shooting it. Kind of fun.
Did Olympus ever make a motorized pen?
They had motorized and I think battery operated one that used the rapid cassettes or Quickmatic cassettes. There were definitely some odd ones like that.
Yeah, you're right. It was a rapid camera. Okay.
Fernando's holding one up there. What is that? The FN?
Quickmatic EM?
EM, electronic, is with winding.
Okay, so it's electric motor, but
yes.
Okay.
And does it actually work? I haven't ever seen one that's working.
No, this is not working.
I wouldn't recommend that for anyone who wants to actually shoot one. They're very unreliable, but they look nice on a shelf.
And earlier, Fernando, you held up, I think, a Leningrad, right?
Yes.
Is that what that was?
Also a brick.
There was a discussion about this on the Discord. One of our constituents who is always busy and can never join us on the show, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, had just picked up one of these for a price that they were very happy with, and they were super excited to give the Leningrad a try. So think of, if you haven't ever seen the Leningrad, it's like an oversized, much heavier, like a Zorky kind of, but it has what I think could unofficially be the strongest wind-up motor of any camera I've ever seen. And the reason I say that is if you have one that works, you pretty much have to use Soviet film that's really thick and strong, because anything with an even remotely thin film base, that camera will shred that film. When you see that thing fire, that thing goes from like 0 to like maximum torque and then suddenly stops like so fast. So there's absolutely no forgiveness in the film transport of that camera, but they are very cool too. So John really likes Clockwork. It seems like we all do. How could you not like Clockwork cameras, right? They are a fun subset of photography. Anybody can make an electric motor, but to make a wind up Clockwork tick 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 tick, kind of thing work, like the self timers, is just really fascinating and a lot of fun.
I can tell you a Clockwork camera which has got a stronger motor than the Leningrad.
Okay, what is it?
That's the debris Sept. It could break.
Oh, really?
And you let it go, it could break your wrist.
Do you have one that works?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Kurt had one, Paul, and Rudy wound up with that one. So I'm gonna have to ask him if he ever shot it, because that was a French camera that uses bulk 35 millimeter film, correct?
Yep.
What was the name of the camera?
It's called the Debris, Debrie Sept, S-E-P-T.
Debris Sept, yes.
It looks like a tiny motion picture camera, and it uses bulk film, but it shoots single image 35 millimeter.
The Barex Exacta has a very interesting long time winding mechanism.
Which one?
The Exactas has a very, very long time winding mechanism. You can set up for 5 seconds, 30 seconds.
Oh, the slow speed governor, you mean?
Yes.
What he's talking about is the self timer is also the slow speed governor for the shutter. So it can go up to 12 seconds. So yeah, it's not an automatic film transport, but it's similar in that you get to hear the mechanical gears and levers clicking and ticking away when it fires. And that's a very audibly pleasing camera for those of you who like that sort of thing.
One of the things I was just thinking was mentioning all of the cosmetic variations for the Ricoh Auto Half. Is there's so many things these days that you come across recovered cameras. People have put different leatherette on or different vinyl stickers and things. I've actually found it really hard in some cases to find good information online. And there was one camera I was looking up that people were insisting was a real camera that the manufacturer had made that actually existed. And they were referencing other forum posts that referenced other forum posts that referenced another forum post that was pretty clearly an April Fool's joke. But if that original post gets lost in time, all of a sudden the internet has got this record of this supposed cosmetic variation being a real thing when it actually wasn't. So I think it really points out the value of something like the books that John is doing, is that if you have an authoritative source and something that is fixed in time, web pages disappear all the time. Sometimes they're archived, sometimes they're not. Sometimes it really is nice just to go back to a printed physical book that you have on your shelf and say, yes, this thing actually existed or didn't exist.
Unless, of course, we got our facts wrong in the first place and printed them.
Which has happened.
At least
it happens.
If you put something online, you can take it off again. There's nothing quite like producing a book, printing 5,000 of them and finding a mistake on the first page. And I've done.
That's why you just have to look for that second edition or third edition or fourth edition printing.
Yes, absolutely.
I've always been so impressed with people who were able to do the research that they could even before the internet days. Peter Deckert's Canon Rangefinder book is such a wealth of information. And, he made that book in the 80s. Bob Rodoloni's first 2 editions of the Nikon book were done in the 80s too. And people who were able to put these things together with firsthand accounts. John, you mentioned earlier being able to speak to people who worked at Ray. You were capturing stories and information that's now permanently documented, at least for as long as society survives, at least, that are firsthand recollections of these cameras being made. And a lot of those people are gone now. You talked to that guy who was 97 when you spoke to him, and he's no longer around anymore. We talked a couple episodes about the re-release of the Nikon rangefinders in 2000 and 2005, the S3 2000 edition and the SP, and they were able to locate people who were still alive when those cameras were first made, and they were able to teach the younger technicians on how to make them. But if Nikon tried to do that today, they wouldn't have been able to, because those people are all gone too. So there was like this sweet spot in the first decade, even second decade maybe of the 21st century, where a lot of the firsthand knowledge was still there, but it's just disappearing quickly. Henry Scherer is gone, and just imagine all the weird Zeiss facts that he had. Larry Gubas is gone. There's so many people that aren't around anymore, and I think it's important that you do what you've done, John. Write these books. I won't pat myself on the back too much here, but I do my best to try and preserve as much as possible. And in some ways, that's what this show is doing too, is that we're hearing some of these firsthand stories from Robert Shanebrook and all the other people that we've had on that can talk about the things that they actually did. Steve Sasson has been on this show before too, talking about the first digital camera. Peter Kitchingman's been on. We've been really blessed with a lot of great guests, and so we're really happy to have you here, John, and just be able to talk a little bit about what you know and preserve that information for future people to hear and read about.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, let's post in the show notes, Mike. Let's post the link to the YouTube videos.
Yeah. Even if, and I want to say too, even if you have no interest in Ray books, this book is really well done. It's a very esoteric model, one that especially people in the United States aren't likely to find very easily. I suspect they're probably not easy to find in England either, but it's just so well done, and it's just such a cool story. And one thing you really didn't get into on this show is that one of the early Ray prototypes was basically built by two Germans, and at one point in time, the first British SLR may have been a German camera, but it didn't quite work out that way too. So there's just so many really, really neat stories that are there. And if you like cameras and you like the technology and the stories of the people who built them, these books are really well done.
I got into trouble for saying that, Mike, something along those lines, because
what?
For those of you who don't know the story, there was this man called Maurice Studdert, and after the war, he went to Germany to meet German scientists and to see what he could pick up, basically, and bring back to Britain. And he found these two German brothers called Hans and Goebel, Werner Goebel, I think that's what their name. And they had designed this camera, and he got hold of it and he brought it back. Now, there's one school of thought that said that the Goebel brothers designed it, and Mr. Studdert merely brought the design back to Ray. And I didn't say so much in the book. I said that was a school of thought. And after it had been published for about 6 months, I got a very irate phone call from the husband of the daughter of Commander Studdert, who threatened to sue me for libel and all sorts of things.
Oh, no.
Said, no, my father designed it. My father definitely designed it. And after I calmed them down, I said, well, can I come and see your evidence? And reluctantly, they invited me to their house. And they had a big old country house out in Norfolk, one of the counties of Britain. And there was a dining room that must have been 20 foot long, filled with a table. And the table was filled with Commander Studdert's notes and pictures and God knows what else. And I was in heaven for about a morning. We parted good company. But I honestly think that Studdert, and I'm going to say it right now, I think Studdert found the design and brought it home. Others will say that he designed it, and he merely got the Goebel brothers to help him draw up the plans. And he brought them back to England with him. He came back to Ray and said, look, guys, I've got this fantastic camera you can build, and here are two friends that I brought from Germany who will help you build it. And they did, and then they disappeared, and nobody knows where they went. And
they got re-educated.
Could well be, yes. But,
I have your website up. Is the prices on the website, is this still correct? Are you still selling the book for £10?
The only problem is it does cost me £7 to send it to the States. So if anyone in the States wants to buy it, I have got to charge £7.
Well, that's totally reasonable to pay. I mean,
that's £8.90, £9, something like that. I don't know. But
I mean, just doing a simple exchange rate calculation, just 20 British pounds is $27 US, and I would happily pay $27 for a well-researched book with lots of cool pictures. So not just saying it because he's here, I would have said it anyway, but the Wrayflex book is absolutely worth buying. And I like that it's coming straight from you too, because it's not going to Amazon like you were finding before too. You're benefiting from it, and maybe you'll even autograph it. I don't know if you do that.
My website is just johnway.org. Go there.
Yep.
And find.
Very cool.
Can I just ask, the few people here who said they've very kindly seen my videos, how did you hear about them?
The YouTube algorithm. I've watched enough camera videos that it just got suggested to me, and then I liked them. So
What would you like to know?
I also have your Minox book,
Oh,
the
yes.
Minox story, but I did that just coincidentally. I just found it in a used bookstore. And
Yeah. The main research on that was done by a man called Maurice Moses, and the publishers wanted to update it after about 10 years, and he was too old, he didn't want to do it. And they asked me if I would update it. So all I did was added what had happened in the 10 years since it had been.
okay.
I can't take too much credit for it. Mr. Moses, whoever he is, never met him, did a lion's share of the work.
Well, your name is on the cover, so
That's the important thing, isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah, I like the Minox collector because it fits in a drawer. This is the non-Minox Japanese Minox film.
Yeah.
Review Mini Star, but it's really from Japan.
It's very similar to there's a Yashica or a Yashica.
Yeah, it's the same as an Adiron.
My Minox cameras are indeed in a drawer.
Yes. A nice collection.
I only have 3, but
I'm getting caught up on the Zoom chat, and we identified the coffee and cream brownie as the Kodak Brownie F, right? That was the official name of it, Paul?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's the Brownie Model F.
And isn't the side, the cream, isn't it like a canvas material?
Yeah, it's sort of a
Like canvas
it's
sort of
almost
feeling?
like paper, but it isn't. It's a
Yeah.
really attractive camera.
Pretty camera, right?
The one I have is pretty beat up, but the other one I had was like almost like new.
Few people talking about the Rapids. Minolta made a Rapid. Canon made a Rapid version of the dial, but the one I was recommending is the normal 35 millimeter version. I think I like the way it looks and holds in your hand. I've said his name a couple times. Brian, are you there? Are you able to talk to us?
Here.
All right. Well, what have you been shooting lately? Let's hear. Let's get an update from you.
I was in Italy, which I chatted to you briefly about, Mike, online. And I had my priorities, including food and wine and all the important stuff.
Sure,
But,
sure.
I managed to make to one camera shop, Grande Marvin, it was called. And the first time I went in to get film because all my film had been X-rayed on the way over, and I just didn't want my first 2 rolls to be the X-rayed rolls, so I went into this shop to get film, and I'd read online that they sold film cameras, but I had completely missed that there was an upstairs. So I left really disappointed. I thought all there was film and sunglasses. And on my second trip back, I went upstairs and they had an amazing display of cameras, and it was a really nice. It was almost like a museum display, but they were all for sale, so it was very seductive. I wasn't in the market for buying anything, but if I was, it looked like a good place. The other 2 places were Il Contato and Wrayflex Topline, I think, but I never made it to those because I prioritized going to the old Fiat factory, which is now a multi-purpose building with a roof garden, open air exhibition place. So that's what I. This was all in Turin, by the way. This was all in Turin. The one thing I had that I might want to talk about this evening was I was in touch with Jeff and Gabe on that other podcast, and they were slagging me off for bringing this 300 millimeter lens as part of my Pentax kit for the holiday, and I bought this specifically to go, and I've been thinking about it since, and it's like I developed this I don't know. I was seduced by the idea of having a really nice telephoto for each of my systems, without being a wildlife photographer or a portrait photographer or anything. And I think it was just the objects that seduced me. You know, the size of the glass and the affordability. And I mentioned to you before, Mike, that I'd gotten this Canon FD 300 millimeter as well. The reality that struck me, and I think Jeff and Gabe kind of predicted it, is that I never used it. I like the idea of owning these lenses, but I really don't have an application for them. I think I used it twice.
Well, how many times have you found a camera bag at a garage sale, an estate sale, a thrift shop that has a Canon AE1 in it and 3 lenses? And one of the lenses is almost always like a 135 or a 200 millimeter lens, and it's always in mint condition.
There you know,
it was like prior to the era of zoom lenses, everybody had a standard, a wide, and a tele lens. It was just like that's how it was sold. And a lot of times, Paul can attest to this, a lot of times The tele and usually the wide lenses were like third parties, Spiritone, Vivitar, good lenses, just not, the original brand. And those things can almost always be found in very, very nice condition because they usually, they just weren't used that often.
Yeah. The two that you find most often among, serious amateur photographers, not just your vacation photographers, but serious amateurs. The two that you most often find that have been unused are fisheyes and 500 millimeter mirror lenses. People decide they have to have them. They have to have them in their kit. They get them and then they never use them, or use them once and put them away.
Specific to fisheyes, you either have the ridiculous Nikkor, the lens that can see behind itself that sells for $3,000 that nobody can afford, or it's a very cheaply built Spiritone that produces results of dubious quality.
I think I'm warming towards the 100 millimeter or 135 kind of focal length as being the longest thing I would probably use, but I might be wrong again. I don't know. Like I have 100 millimeter for the Canon EF, which I use all the time for work, and that's a macro, and I've got the 200 millimeter for the Pentax 6.7, which is effectively 100 millimeter as well. So I'm thinking that's probably a more generally usable focal length than the 200s and the 300s, which are probably more specialist. But the 135 seem to be, I did a search for Pentax K and Canon FD just before I brought this topic up, and 135 seems to be very much available. But is that because nobody ever used them and that's why they're all for sale? Or is that a good focal length?
Well, the Takumars, they made a 135 2.8 Takumar that was actually a very nice lens, but it's a dead focal length. I mean, it's one that the zooms killed 135 millimeter lens. And the same was true of the 85s. And one of the best 85s I think ever made was that 85 f2 Olympus Zuko lens. This is just a fantastic lens. But people wanted zooms. When zooms came out and they got to be good quality, the fixed focal length telephotos went away. In fact, so did the wides. The 28 millimeters, 35 millimeters, they went away when the good quality zooms came out.
But these days, try to get an Olympus 85 millimeter f2, and it will cost you a fortune because everybody wants one. They're highly desirable now.
Yep.
I lack the understanding of lens construction or optical formulas, but I've seen that a large number of 135 lenses are usually triplets. Like that seems to be a focal length that's incredibly simple to make. So I think that's probably why they started off as being so common, is that it was a way to create a lens that was different enough from a 50 millimeter prime to get you, something farther away, but these companies could churn them out relatively inexpensively. And then when you have a family man at the local photo shop trying to buy his new family camera and the salesperson entices him, hey, you want to get this lens? Look at how far away you could see. Think about it. Your kid's baseball game, going to the zoo, blah, 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 and they sell you this fantasy that you're probably going to use it a lot, when in reality, it's a fairly simple lens that produces good results and can be thrown in as part of a package. So that's probably why you saw them so much, but people just found that there weren't too many instances where they needed them.
There are Leica M-mount 135 lenses. I don't have good enough memory to rattle off the particulars, but they're like the cheapest Leica M-mount lenses you can buy.
The 135 Hectors are $90.
Yeah.
The one of the most useful, and the one that still people really like and still shoot a lot with, is the 105-25 Nikon. They made two versions of it, a silver sonar and a black Gauss version, and they're both excellent lenses. But they're not terribly expensive, but they're very popular. People shoot them. They don't just sit on shelves. I actually have both of those, but the one I like better is the 105-18. What are you holding up there, Fernando? Oh yeah, Triotar. I can't see the focal length.
Context. That's the context.
Another great Nikkor, if you like long lenses, that I think deserves to be separated from the common ones would be the Nikkor, the 180 f2.8. I have two versions of that lens. Both are manual focus, but that's a really fun lens to shoot both on film and digital, because the amount of separation you can get between your subject and the background is amazing. I mean, I've played with that lens on my Nikon Z5, and you have to stand, a good deal away especially if you want to get more than just a headshot. But the results that it gets are almost three-dimensional. So if you're looking to get into telephoto lenses and maybe the 135 f3.5 lenses or whatnot aren't appealing to you, I would say that what Paul said, the 105-25 Nikkor and the 180 2.8 are two exceptions that are worth adding to your collection.
And the other one, Mike, is the if you're into Leicaflex, the R series. Leica made several versions of the 180-2.8 that are also very, very good lenses, and a 250 millimeter f4. They're not expensive. I mean, you can buy them for $200, which is probably twice what the Nikon is, and they're twice as heavy. But they're also very good lenses. The 180s are especially good for environmental portraiture. If you like taking pictures of people, you can really isolate the subject from the background.
And they have absolutely no, or at least what I would consider to be distracting bokeh. There's no orbs. I mean, you're going to get a creamy background that just, it almost looks like if you were to take a picture of someone with like a forest or a green nature background behind them, it almost looks like a, what do they call it? The muslin cloths.
Yeah, painted backdrop.
It looks like a painted backdrop. That's how well it separates your subject from your background. So I'm a huge fan of the 180, the 105-25s. But, really for the rare times that I'm going to use anything longer than 85 millimeter, I'm usually just content with a zoom lens.
One of the nice things about some of the cheap lenses is that the thing that will really blur your background together, really blend those bokeh balls together, is undercorrected spherical aberration. So if you're familiar with like the bubble bokeh, where you get really harsh rings, that is overcorrected spherical aberration. And the opposite of that, undercorrected, is where it really blends in nicely. And a lot of the higher end lenses, they try to perfectly correct spherical aberration, which can lead to very sort of solid background blur. And in some cases, those cheaper, lower quality lenses that didn't fully correct spherical aberration will just smooth that background out a little bit more than a more expensive, fancier design.
What was the German lens that they call it the soap bubble lens?
The Trioplan.
The Trioplan. Okay, that's right.
100 millimeter or 2.8. I think there might be a 3.5.
Yeah, I think TT Artisan or one of those Chinese cameras or companies re-released that to recreate it. But I never liked it to begin with, so I wouldn't ever want to buy a brand new lens that does that on purpose.
Well, you're starting to see now there are companies that are releasing ones that have it adjustable. So TT Artisan has released one, and Cosina has released a Voigtlander, the Portrait Heliar 75 millimeter, where you can adjust the spherical aberration to go between under or overcorrected and essentially go between bubble bokeh and smooth bokeh. So it's something Canon and Nikon have done in very high-end expensive lenses. But we're now seeing, for some reason, within the last couple of months, it's become a trend for companies to do manual focus lenses with that control.
Very cool. Well, we are getting to that point. We should start winding down. I wanted to give anybody who hasn't had a chance to talk. Guy from Germany, you've been active in the chat. I don't know if you wanted to share your thoughts on the Yashica Adiron, or if anybody else has picked up any new guests or anything quick that they'd want to share before we go.
Yeah, I can share on the camera you have. I think I heard you in previous podcast 6 or 5, Relied A110.
That's Anthony's favorite camera.
Yeah, I have one in gold, and it works. It took me some time to figure it out. Sometimes it doesn't work because the newer cassettes, which are, I think, made exclusively by Lomography now, they don't fit really good. So there is a pin that selects high speed ISO, and somehow this camera also has a switch. When it's closed, it cuts the electricity off. So when the cassette it's a bit too bright, too wide, it presses the pin too much, and then it disconnects somehow the electricity. So what you should do, you put some electrical tape, and it's enough in order to make the cassette not go all the way down and press the pin too much. Then it works and it produces amazing results. Took me some time to figure it out. Yeah.
Well, Leon just commented in the chat that he has a Rolei A110 that works great. Guy has one that works. So Anthony, I think you just need to try harder. You need to find more.
Anthony is the king of dead Rolei A110s.
Never again.
Never again.
Yeah, I have 4 dead ones.
There you go. Okay, we're back on Team Anthony. Leon said he's happy to give one away. So we'll see if anyone takes him up on that and it survives the shipment. I shared this on the Discord and the Show Your Gear one, but I was pretty excited to get a camera that had been on like my passive list. Like I wasn't actively trying to find one, but every once in a while I would stumble upon one because I think it looks really neat. But this is a German camera called the Dr. Voller SAR, SAAR, Favor, or FAVOR. This is called the Favor 2. It's a little scale focus, relatively simple camera. It's got a very shiny chrome finish to it, but it's got a good amount of heft to it. It feels like maybe a step up from your typical cheap scale focus camera. It has what looks to be a decent 4.5 centimeter f2.8 lens. I know nothing super exciting, but it's got a nice blue lens coating to it. This one has a Prontor S shutter with speeds from 1 to 300. The viewfinder, although small, I can very easily see through wearing prescription glasses. The shutter on this one works fine. It kind of has a neat little look to it, sort of a low profile top plate, which kind of makes it feel a little bit smaller than it really is, but really attractive. And it just doesn't look like really anything else in my collection. So I was pretty happy to pick this one up. I bought it from a seller in Belgium. So this one took 12 days to get to me from Belgium, which I think is very reasonable. Anybody else have any cool pickups?
It's not a new to me camera. I should turn the blur off on my video. It's not new to me, but I just got it back like literally 5 minutes before we started. Came in the mail from a repair because this is my SL66 that jammed up.
Pretty. Who repaired it?
Who repaired it? Yeah.
Rene, I can't remember his last name. He's up in Quebec.
Rene Smith.
He's
No.
I'd have to look up his name. He's French Canadian. He's in Quebec. Service Camera Pro.
I want to see if he's on my list.
Harry Fleener doesn't work on SL66s anymore. He's kind of the most well-known Rolly guy in the U.S. And he recommended Dave Feely in Colorado, who is retired now. And then Dave recommended Rene in Quebec, who said he is half retired, but he got this done in a few weeks. And I haven't shot it yet because I really got it 5 minutes before we started, but I'm excited to take it out. And
absolutely one of my favorite cameras.
Yeah, it's heavy and unwieldy, but I love it.
Yeah.
And what was the name of Renee's shop?
Service Camera Pro.
Okay. Yep. That's all right. They are on my list. Not that it makes any bit of difference, but it is one that has come recommended from people before too. So that's good to hear.
I mean, it's hard to know just from talking to someone, of course, but he definitely sounded like he knew what he was talking about.
For sure.
Yeah.
That's great.
And Mike is busting my chops because I'm looking at a Tomiyama Art 170, which is a 617 camera that does 617 or 6x12, has a ground glass back along with a roll film back, and it's much smaller than my Fuji G617.
It's got a Nikkor lens too, doesn't it?
Yeah, Nikon 90 millimeter 5.6 lens, which is a slightly wider than the 100 millimeter lens on the Fuji.
So I want to justify my busting of your chops because as we all know, you buy and sell these Fuji 617s and you don't use them. And then now you're going to get an even more obscure and cool camera that we all know you're just going to sell it to Anthony.
Well, but if I put a strap on it, I might keep it for, a few days or a week or something.
Maybe.
So I just got back from Ireland about 3 weeks ago, and I took my X-Pan. I don't know why. I just decided to burn money. I shot only Provia and Velvia in it. And I just got some pictures that I love. But I'm kind of wishing I had a 617 camera because...
How far south did you go?
We went to County Kerry and Cork.
Okay, I'm in Kerry right now. I'm on the corner of Kerry and Cork in Kenmare.
Oh, we stayed in Kenmare. That's a fun little town.
I've been here for a month.
And I'm an hour from Poe.
Oh, yeah, you're in Cork. Cork. We went to Drombeg, Stone Circle.
Oh, lovely, yeah.
And I thought we were going to come over to see you, and we just, we had such great weather at the beginning of the trip, and then it got crappy for the last 2.5 weeks, and force gale 9 winds last night. It was just nasty. But I've been shooting panoramas with the Nikon 28 millimeter PC lens and the Sony digital, and then stitching them together. And it's working out very well. Huge files.
You've shared us some of the results and they look really nice.
Yeah.
Lots of cemeteries.
Yeah.
I think you should always own cameras so you have the potential to use them. Because if you don't own them, there's no potential. And if you do own them, you have potential. Whether or not you use it, that's
Now, see,
fine.
I like that attitude.
I do too. I like the
That's
way
a
you
good
think.
attitude. Yeah. How do you know if you'll use it or not if you don't have it?
There you
Yeah,
go.
what if you one day find that exact perfect use for that camera and you don't have it? I mean, the fear
Sure.
of that is enough to drive you. You just have to own the camera to get rid of that fear of not being prepared for the photo situation that might never, ever happen.
If the Polish army ever invades the United States and holds people with Polish start TLRs in higher regard than the typical American citizen, I will be prepared because I have a Polish start TLR.
And if you're going to buy a camera, what if it stops working? You should never just buy one camera. You should always get a second one for parts.
Second,
Maybe,
yeah.
and then once you fixed it up and that first one is working really well, you don't want to take it out and risk damaging it or having it stolen. So you have to buy a third one that you can use.
We used to do, we haven't done in a long time lightning rounds. Anthony always used to ask us lightning round questions. So I got a lightning round question for everybody real quick. What is the one camera that you have the most duplicates of? I'll go first. The Nikon EL2. I love that camera. I have like 4 of them. When I say duplicates, I mean like redundant duplicates, not like a variation, of a similar model. What do you have the most of, Stephen?
I have, I once owned 2 Olympus EM5 Mark IIs, Micro Four Thirds digital camera, and I sold both of them and I regretted it. And then I ended up buying 4 more of them.
Okay, that counts.
They make them in 3 different colors, so I had to get all the other colors. And then I found one that somebody had broken the LCD screen off and it was cheap. So how could I pass that one up?
Sure.
And I've now ended up with 4.
Paul, do you have any duplicates?
Nikon Fs.
Nikon Fs, yeah. Okay.
I probably have 15 or 20 of them. I can't.
They're multiplying.
Yeah, well, they're not. They have so little value that
Yeah.
they come in and they just never leave.
Anthony, do you have any duplicates?
I would say it's
besides Rolly A110s.
The Kodak medalists.
Okay,
3.
That's a great camera to have a duplicate of because honestly, you need it. Plus, they're just cool to have.
Yep.
John, you have a fairly substantial collection, so I have to imagine you got a couple duplicates in there. What's one you're willing to admit to?
Well, it depends how you call duplicates, isn't it? I've got 10 Wrayflexes, but they're all slightly different. Oh, how about 6 coronet midgets? But
there you go.
Oh, wow.
The coronet midgets. Do you have all different colors?
All the colors, yes.
Yes, those are pretty.
Great.
But that's not a duplicate. If they're different colors,
That's true.
Well, then I never buy more than one.
Okay. Well, that's still a good answer, though. Brian, what do you got that's a duplicate?
I have no duplicates given your very
None.
strict criteria, Mike. No.
Okay. All right. Well, without my criteria, what camera do you have the most of?
I'm very fond of the Shinon Auto 3001 point and shoot, and I have the Kodak S1100 XL, which is the same camera. So that's the closest I have to a duplicate.
Okay. All right. Fernando, do you have any duplicates?
Of course, I have like 6 or 7 Minolta Dynax because I buy them at €5.
Yeah.
And there is one thing very interesting for this camera. First of all, the mount is great. And second, you can program lead out. Please.
Lead her out, yeah.
Lead out. And last week I was in Spain in a gathering of analog photographers, and I couldn't help myself. I bought another Contarex. This is the 3rd.
Oh, jeez. Now that's an expensive camera to have a duplicate of.
It wasn't so expensive. I couldn't help myself to buy it.
Leon typed in the chat that he has duplicates of the Penti 2, or he has a bunch of different Veras, the Carl Zeiss Veras. Very cool.
Veras are cool. I mean, you can collect a cassette of those too because of the different variations in colors.
Tons of them, yeah.
I just realized I lied. I have a camera that I have 11 different copies of. So it's really bad not only when you own 11 cameras or 11 versions of a camera, but that you also forget that you own that many of them.
That's definitely bad, yes. Andrew Madsen, do you have any cameras that you have duplicates of?
Probably 5 Pentax Auto 110s and the Super. Just one of the Supers. I don't know why I have so many, but I have a full set of lenses, all 6 lenses they made for it, and the teleconverter, and the winders, and the flashes, and the filters, and anyway, that's the camera I've gone craziest trying to get everything, I think.
Let's see. Today's Tuesday here. We don't have anything planned for the next show. So our next recording should be on the 16th of June at our usual time. We're going to go back to a normal recording in the evening in the United States. So that means those of you in Europe, it'll be middle of the night. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to do a camera store episode. We did one many years ago. We had a couple different guys calling from various camera shops, but we're trying to get at least two of the people from Robert's Camera in Indianapolis, Indiana, aka Use Photo Pro Online, who we've gotten many cameras from. I know Paul's dealt with many times. They're the ones that sold me the Detrola 400 that I picked up earlier this year. So we're trying to get them to come on, share some of their stories, see if we can find any other people that would want to join us that work in another camera store to just talk about some of the cool stories over the years, or what they're seeing trends now, what people are looking for, what's hot, what's not, things like that. Any last questions before we go?
I think on that subject, it would be cool if you could get someone from Blue Moon Camera in Portland. That's just one of the coolest camera stores I've been in.
Well, Miles had to sign off early, so maybe I will call him and see if he could get someone to come on. I agree. They're a pretty neat shop.
There's two camera stores here in Salt Lake one that really only sells vintage used cameras, and one that sells that and new stuff. But I know the owners pretty well of both shops and could mention it to them anyway.
In Salt Lake?
Yeah, in Salt Lake.
Inkley's have closed, haven't they?
Inkley's closed, but at least the main Salt Lake location that I used to go to was bought by Allen's Camera, which is a local store with a few locations. And they're actually, I've bought a number of cool used cameras from them. And they still process film there too, so.
Here's an interesting, in the photo, and I was in the photo industry for so many years. There was always something, every year there was an award that was given to the dealer of the year. And the dealer of the year was usually, a multi-store chain or a big deal. Lowell Inkley was one of the most respected camera store owners in the U.S. But when times changed in around 2000 and things began digital really hurt the film industry. The PMA dealer of the year was like the kiss of death. If you were the dealer of the year, you weren't going to last longer than 2 years before your store was out of business. Ritz Camera was one of the. Chuck Wolf at Wolf's Camera was another. Lowell Inkley from Inkley's. Glazers from Seattle. There were a lot of dealers, and they were great stores, and they just did not survive.
Well, Glazers is still there.
Yeah, Glazers is still around. They're the ones that are surviving.
I think, I don't know, I'm sure you know, but Wolf and Ritz ended up being the same company. I don't know.
Well, Chuck Wolf was Eddie Ritz's son-in-law.
Oh, okay.
So
well, they
were family.
If I recall correctly, they bought Inkley's at some point before Inkley's went out of business.
They bought the inventory. Oh, it's a mess of intrigue in the photo industry. But the guys at Roberts are great. The Used Photo Pro is Robert's used camera arm. Right. And the lead buyer is a guy named Nelson Coppage, who was at KEH's lead buyer for many, many years before KEH sold out to new ownership. Nelson then went to Used Photo Pro. And they're just terrific. Good people, with easy to deal with, and they check things out very carefully.
As a Canadian, I've bought several used items from Used Photo Pro, Robert's Camera, actually through eBay without even intending to. It just turned out that they had really reasonable shipping rates to Canada, and so many other sellers don't. So it just worked out. They had what I wanted at a good price, and the shipping was reasonable, and I've been really happy with it every time.
I've bought quite a number of cameras from Used Photo Pro and have always been happy with them.
Yeah, I'll be curious to hear some of their stories, see what they think of us.
Hey, Andrew, do you have any of your Ireland pictures online anywhere?
I have a few that I posted on Instagram. I'm kind of weird for someone my age that I print my photos, but I don't usually post them online. But I can find some and put them on Discord anyway.
Yeah, put them on the Discord server. I'd like to see them.
Yeah.
What's your name on Discord, Andrew?
I just changed it to Andrew Madsen.
You did? Okay.
My name's something else. So
got it. Yeah. Got it. Yeah. Sometimes we've had people come from Discord and I don't know that it's the same person.
Yeah.
Because they're using an alias. Leon asked in the chat, we were quickly talking about the Pen F SLRs, about the brightness. And Steven commented that the darkness of the later models is over exaggerated. And that they're both, the F and the later FT and FV, are perfectly usable. I have an F and an FT right here, and I took the lenses off both so as to take the lens out of the equation, and just pointing it at a light in my room, I will agree that the F is brighter. But one thing that I did notice is that the two cameras have a different focusing screen, and the focusing screen on the FT is more centered, and the more the brightness is somehow converged into the middle, whereas the brightness of the focusing screen on the original F is more dispersed. So I wonder if there really isn't necessarily a brightness difference, just the way that the focus screen has the light more sent towards the center on the later models, presumably to work with the meter, is probably why people think that the earlier models are brighter. But in terms of like real world usage, if you have the 1.4 or a reasonably fast lens on it, I agree with Steven. They're both very usable. I do tend to like the original model first because I like the Gothic F. I have no need for the meter. The double stroke on a half frame camera seems like overkill, but it's not a deal breaker either. But either way, these are just wonderful cameras. Any Pen SLR is absolutely worth adding to your collection. We do need to go. So again, our next show should be recorded 13 days from now, so Monday, June 16th at our usual time. As always, we will post a show announcement a couple days before. Unfortunately, I didn't get this one out until the day before because I've been out of town for the past several days and just didn't get around to it. But as always, the topics and discussions on the Camerosity podcast are determined by you. We love having everybody come on. John, thank you so much for joining us and sharing us your stories about the Ray and just what you know about Clockwork cameras and everything else. It's always exciting to me to get some people we don't get to talk to too often. Andrew, thank you for coming on the show. Guy, Fernando, you've been on before. It's great to see Brian MacDomhnaill. You're one of our troopers that will sometimes come on even when it's the middle of the night for you. That's all I got. You guys have a great rest of your day, and thanks for coming.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you
very much.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I don't have I have a pair of $14 earbuds.
Ooh, fancy.
Yeah.
How about me? I've got my $200 earbuds in. Can you hear me?
Oh, you sound terrible.
No, you sound terrible.
I've got my nice podcasting headphones, and the other day I stepped on the jack and bent it, and now it only has audio in one channel. Fucking shingles.